Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We begin in the name of Almighty God, and we send our salutations of peace. It's a great honor for us here tonight at PGMA to have our governor with us, His Excellency Governor Wes Moore, and his team for coming to our community. I would like to also acknowledge Brother Jamil and the entire PGCMC for putting this together as a community of faith built upon standing for justice and making a difference in our community. As our beloved Prophet, may the peace of God be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he informed us that the best of you are those that are most beneficial to others. So your faith is connected to how you benefit your neighbor. And as Muslim Americans in our country that we love so much, it's an honor for us to have our governor come in our masjid, in our mosque. So I'd like to begin by asking Brother Jamil to start the program. May God bless all of you. It is an honor for us, as I mentioned to you before. It is a great honor for us to have you here. And this is the Muslim Assembly of Prince George Muslim Association. Welcoming Brother Jamil.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Jazakallah khairun, brother Imam Hassan. So glad for the governor may not know it. Imam Hassan Muhammad is the new Imam here. He started beginning of September, alhamdulillah. And he's already been a teacher to many of the people in his community. When they saw him coming here, it was like, alhamdulillah, we have somebody, and he's already shown a great deal of leadership. Raditu billahi rabbin wa bil islami din wa bi Muhammadin nabiyyin wa rasul. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to thank everybody in the community for coming out, and I particularly want to thank the Imam and the Board of Directors and the management team of PGMA for hosting us for something which is quite historic for us here, to have Governor Wes Moore here as our guest addressing our community, and earlier having addressed a whole room full of the Imams in PGCMC, in Prince George's. As we know, unity is one of the key things that strengthens the Muslims as a part of our deen. So it's good to see everybody who was there and able to join in with us. For those who are not familiar, Prince George's County Muslim Council is a political civic group whose mission is to encourage the participation of the Muslim community in the civic affairs of the county, the purpose of which is to facilitate our way of life, and also to help improve the quality of life for not only ourselves, but for all of our neighbors. As we know, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ used to stress the importance of the rights of the neighbors so much that the companions used to believe that they may have the right to inherit from us. That's how important it was for them. So this is something that we focus on, but this is something that is needed very much by the entire community. So just like you support your masjids and support your schools, we need you to support PGCMC. And matter of fact, there are some flyers outside for an event we're having in a couple of weeks, and we hope that people will come and be a part of strengthening our political empowerment. It's not enough to complain. That is useless. You have to get involved. You have to support. We have to build institutions if we want to empower ourselves as an ummah. And we know with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was about the ummah, even to the point where during the Battle of Uhud, just a few people disobeyed the orders of the Prophet and they lost the entire battle. So we don't want to keep losing the entire battle because we're not willing to be united. So at this time, I would like to welcome the 63rd governor of the state of Maryland. He is Maryland's first black governor in the state's 246-year history, and is just the third African-American elected to governor in the history of the United States. Born in Tacoma Park, Maryland on October 15, 1978, to Joy and Wesley Moore, Moore's life took a tragic turn when his father died of a rare but treatable virus when he was just 3 years old. After his father's death, his family moved to the Bronx. By the way, I'm from the Boogie Down. That's where I was born. To live with Moore's grandparents before returning to Maryland at age 14. Some of y'all know what I meant by the Boogie Down, others don't. I'm just saying I'm from the Bronx. Moore is a proud graduate of Valley Forge Military Academy and College, where he received an associate's degree in 1998 and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. Afterward, he went on to earn his bachelor's in international relations and economics at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, where he graduated Phi Beta Kappa. While at Johns Hopkins, Moore interned in the office of former Baltimore Mayor Kurt Schmoke. Moore was the first Black Rhodes Scholar in the history of Johns Hopkins University. As a Rhodes Scholar, he earned a master's in international relations from Wilson College at Oxford. In 2005, he was deployed to Afghanistan as a lieutenant with the 82nd Airborne Division, leading soldiers in combat. Immediately upon returning home, he served as a White House Fellow, advising on issues of national security and international relations. In 2010, Wes Moore wrote The Other Wes Moore, a story about the fragile nature of opportunity in America, which became a perennial New York Times bestseller. He went on to write other best-selling books that reflect on the issues of race, equity, and opportunity, including his latest book, 5 Days, which tells the story of Baltimore the days that followed the death of Freddie Gray in 2015. Moore built and launched a Baltimore-based business called Bridge Edu, which reinvented the freshman year of college for underserved students to increase their likelihood of a long-term success. Bridge EU was acquired by the Brooklyn-based student financial success platform, Edquity, not equity, but Edquity, education equity, in 2018. It was Moore's commitment to taking on the toughest challenges that brought him to the Robert Hood Foundation, where he served for 4 years as CEO. During his tenure, the Robert Hood Foundation distributed over $600 million toward lifting families out of poverty, including here in Maryland. While the Robert Hood Foundation is headquartered in New York City, Wes and his family never moved from their home in Baltimore. Moore has also worked in finance with Deutsche Bank in London and with Citigroup in New York. He and his wife, First Lady Dawn Flight Moore, have 2 children, Mia 13 and James 10, and a dog, Tucker Balti, named after Baltimore, I guess. All right. At this moment, it is my honor to welcome to the podium the 63rd Governor of Maryland, Wes Moore. Takbir!
Assalamu alaikum. This is an honor beyond words to have the chance to spend time with you, to have the opportunity earlier to break bread, and to have a time to be in a place in the space of God. Brother Jamil, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for always pushing to make us better. We are a better place because of you. And I'm honored to be in the work with you. Imam, I just want to say thank you and congratulations. This is truly God's grace, and watching someone of such integrity move into this beautiful space is incredibly important, and we are all humbled by your leadership. It was brought up to me earlier today that I'm the first governor, and I'm thankful to be here with my lieutenant governor as well. But this is the first time in the history of PGCMC, in the history of this wonderful space, that a governor of the state has ever visited. Ever. And I want to say thank you for welcoming me. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for understanding that everything we do and any bit of progress that we make, it's because we move together. And I know that I believe deeply in the idea of being able to move quickly and move with intentionality. And that includes showing up places that oftentimes we did not show up before. That means being able to move together and make things happen to the benefit of our communities, And it means doing it and doing it unapologetically, knowing that we are all surrounded by God's love. Because I am the governor, and I understand sometimes the restrictions that people put between how elected officials can move. But I never forget about the fact that I am a child of God. I never forget about the fact that it was God who placed us here. And it's God who has expectations for us while we're here. And I never have any confusion about who orders my steps, ever. I'm thankful to Hassan and Mukhtar. I'm thankful to everybody here for this invitation to speak. And I'm thankful for the chance to be able to share. And in fact, I know Chief Aziz, who I saw earlier, I just want to say thank you as well for all of your guidance and leadership that you continue to bring a history maker inside of this seat. And we're grateful for you. As soon as I came and I was preparing to come here, I started thinking about the person who had always been the fuel of my faith growing up. And I started thinking about my grandfather. My grandfather was actually the first one on my mom's side of the family that was born in the United States. He was born in South Carolina. And when he was just a toddler, his father, my great-grandfather, was a minister. And he was a very vocal minister. He was a minister who did not just preach the word of God, but he called out those who did not act accordingly on earth. And that made him unpopular. And there were people who did not appreciate how honest he was. And eventually he started getting threats. And eventually those threats turned into physical threats. And in the middle of the night, one night, he picked up his family, to include my grandfather, who was just a toddler at the time. And they left. They left because the Ku Klux Klan ran them out. Where the Ku Klux Klan picked them up and forced him to pick up his family, and they went back to Jamaica. And for much of my family, they always said they refused to come back to this country. And much of my family never did. I still have plenty of members of my family still in Jamaica. But my grandfather, he decided to come back here. And he always said, in all of his humility, he said, this country would be incomplete without me. So he returned to the United States. He went to Lincoln University, which is a historically black college and university in Pennsylvania. And he eventually, after receiving his degree, he went on to become a minister, just like his father. And so when I say that I'm a man of faith, I am not just a man of faith, but I'm someone who comes from a family of faith leaders. But it also is not at all lost to me that some of my grandfather's earliest memories were memories of terror. Some of the first memories that my grandfather had was watching a country reject him. And I think about him often because whenever I'm having moments of where my heart is heavy, wherever I'm having moments where I'm feeling personal strife or confusion or reflection, I turn to him and I turn to his Bible. Because one of my prized possessions that I have is my grandfather's Bible, which still sits in my office to this day. And that Bible is probably over 70 years old. And one of the reasons that I love his Bible is because it's one of the only things that I have in my life that gave me an opportunity to see how he thinks. Because all throughout the Bible, and I hope that you all have a chance to come see it one day, there's notes, there's pages turned and flipped and dog ears and questions and referrals to other parts of the Bible. So I read his Bible and I can actually get a chance to see what questions he had. about how his mind worked, about what he saw as his place. And I think about that because, and by the way, that was actually that and Frederick Douglass's Bible were the two Bibles that I was sworn in on when I became the governor. And I was reading through Psalm 121, and it spoke to me because it said, "The Lord protects you. The Lord is a shelter right by your side. The sun will not strike you by day. The moon will not strike you by night. He will protect your life, both now and forever." And for me, that passage has always been about a common bond of humanity. Knowing that even in the darkness there is light, that even in the pain there is joy, that even in the heartache there is refuge. And it's not at all lost on me that in this moment and in the world right now, that all of that is being tested because the heartache is so real and the pain is so present, and oftentimes the challenge feels so intentional and generational. And I know as the world is coming on Monday, and Monday is marking the one-year anniversary of the October 7th attack that was orchestrated by Hamas. And leading up to that difficult anniversary, I've heard from and I've spoken with Marylanders of all backgrounds, of all faiths, in mosques and in synagogues and in churches. And it's not just as we get closer to that moment and in all the conversations, my heart continues to break and feel heavy for all of the innocent lives that were lost and the violence and the injustice that has scourged. But it's the fact that that violence is not new. It's generational. That the violence did not just begin. That for so many communities, we've been dealing with this violence for a very long time. That for far too many people on our earth, like my grandfather, some of their earliest memories have been memories of terror. And so while I understand that, and I appreciate the fact that October 7th is best recognized as a day that we do remember what happened and the victims that were taken hostage and wounded or lost their lives, I also know that creating space to focus on the horror and the tragedy of that day matters because it does uplift the memories of those who were lost. And my feelings about how we mark October 7th do not at all minimize my compassion or my empathy or my grief for those who are still suffering in Gaza, for those who are still suffering in the West Bank, and for the fact that for many people in Gaza and the West Bank and beyond, that suffering is not new. It's suffering that was felt by generations before as well. And the scale of the suffering is heartbreaking with so many Palestinian civilians who are fleeing their homes, in many cases the only homes that they've known, who are lacking basic necessities, and who are losing their lives. And we owe it to them to assure that the Palestinian people can live in dignity and live with security and live with freedom. And here in Maryland, we firmly support the rights of our constituents to safely advocate for human rights and justice and constitutional protections and civil liberties, and that especially includes our students. I pledged an oath to defend those rights, and I will always defend those rights. I pledged that oath to defend those rights when I became the 63rd governor of this state. I pledged an oath to defend those rights when I joined the United States military. And so I want to reiterate that my number one priority as the governor is the safety and security for all Marylanders, no matter where they worship or what they believe. That those rights will be supported and protected. Today, tomorrow, and always. And I'm up here who knows that all of our hearts are big enough to be able to both hold the pain and the promise for many people. That I'm up here, someone who stands with the hostage families and someone who believes we need to bring the hostages home now. And I'm up here who stands as someone who stands with the people that are in this room who have loved ones directly impacted by this crisis, and I stand with those who are outside of this room who are grieving as we speak, both for Palestinian civilians and Israeli civilians. That I'm someone who wants peace, and that I'm someone who believes that people deserve that. And the sadness and the grief that so many feel right now cannot be put into words, but I believe that we must use this moment to reach out across all faiths, across all backgrounds, and to turn our pain into purpose. We cannot turn the clock back on the horrific acts of violence and hatred that we have seen. We understand the challenges, and many of those things have broken many of our hearts and broken them in some cases permanently. But we can work together to demonstrate here in Maryland and here in our communities the kind of future that we yearn to build and set the example that we hope that others can follow. We can build a future where hate and violence find no safe harbor. We can build a future where everybody knows that they can come up in their own space and in their own state with peace and security and prosperity, and knowing that that will not only be defended, it will be protected. We can build a future where the dreams of our children are not held captive by poverty. And we can build a future where we can actually build pathways to work and wages and wealth for everyone in our communities and not just some people in our communities. That's where our work comes in. And I'm thankful that we are now 2 years into our administration. 2 years into our time. And while I'm proud of the progress that we've been able to make, most importantly, I'm proud of how we've been able to make it. And that's together. Because there are so many people in this room who have raised their hands to serve on boards and commissions. So many people in this room who have raised their hands to work in partnership with this administration. So many people in this room who have continued to grow small businesses and turn their small businesses into larger businesses. So many people in this room who are remarkable members of our administration. People who believe that we all have a role in creating the kind of future that we hope for. And when we said that we were going to focus on these issues, we meant it. And that is why we launched a historic assault on child poverty that will lift a combined 60,000 children up a rung on the economic ladder, because no child's future should be determined before they even have a say. That's why we've improved access to capital and liquidity for entrepreneurs, with a specific focus on our minority-owned businesses and our women-owned businesses and our veteran-owned businesses, and we've delivered over $2 billion in state contracts to minority-owned businesses in just our first 18 months alone. It's why we've introduced and passed the most comprehensive housing package of any Maryland governor in recent history, to help turn more renters into homeowners and to make sure that everybody understands what my grandparents understood, that we should all have an opportunity to own more than they owe, and all have an opportunity to own a little piece of this country that has welcomed them. That our opportunity to build real pathways to work and wages and wealth is real, because we now see that more Marylanders are getting back to work than ever before, that wages are up, and we're building an inclusive economy. Because I believe that for us, if we're not building an economy that works for everybody, you're not building a real economy. And if what we're doing does not make dollars, it does not make sense. It's economic growth. It's economic freedom. It's economic prosperity. And I know why that matters, because this is very personal to me, because I do not come from a family that is used to writing laws. I come from a family that's used to suffering the consequences of the laws that were written. I come from a family who was not only not in the room when the laws are being made, I come from a family who probably wasn't even being thought about when those laws were being written. And so we said this is a moment to change the way that we apply this work, that the reason that we can focus on this work is because it is personal. Because I do stand here as a person who watched my father die in front of me when I was 3 years old because he didn't get the health care that he needed. That I do stand here in front of you as a person who was raised by an immigrant single mother who did not get her first job that gave her benefits until I was 14 years old. And so when people talk about unfair wages, I don't need a white paper to explain what that looks like. That I do stand here as a person who felt handcuffs to my wrist by the time I was 11 years old because we grew up in a community that was over-policed and we knew it. That I grew up as a student of this history, understanding that this history, the history of this country, is that this country was partially built by us, but it was not entirely for us. That I understand our past, its unevenness, it's at times its cruelty, its unfairness. And that's why we've decided to make a very intentional decision to do things differently. That we have a historic opportunity in this state to do different. We have a historic opportunity to build a society that those who came before us hope for, and those who come after us that they deserve. And that's why I know that especially when it's hard, our ability to stand together and grow together, and our ability, frankly, to make us better, is why this moment matters so much. And so I want to end my remarks with where I begin, with the thing that always grounds me in my times of uncertainty, and that's my faith. Because before any of us had any of the positions that we held or that we hold, before any of us joined the congregations that we are a part of or achieved the success that each one of you have seen in your lives, we were perfect. because we were children of God. We were his reflections, we were his creations. And I know that with that become the lessons of love that we incorporate and that we hold dear, and those lessons transcend to the holy books that we read and the places where we pray. And I can stand before you and I say that I draw inspiration from Psalm 61, which says, when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And I know I can stand here before you and say, and I also draw inspiration from the Quran, which tells us therein they will hear no abusive speech, nor any talk of sin, only the saying of peace. Peace. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for being our partners in the work. Thank you for making us better. Assalamu alaikum.
Takbir. Takbir. Alhamdulillah. Governor, just before we get started, we have a few questions, both from PGCMC and from members of the community who sent in. I know we have a hard stop at 6 o'clock. I just want to take an opportunity to also just recognize a couple of other masajid who were not in the room with us. Maryland Muslim Association, Brother Zita, can you just raise your hand? Yeah, you, okay. Yes, that's okay. I see Masjid al-Hikmah. We were doing actually a voter registration at Ali Khan Islamic Center. Well, I was hoping to senior elders. Raise your hand, Aki. Yeah, you, okay. Just want to recognize some of the masajid members who weren't with us earlier. And I see Hassa. Aki, Rahim, I thought you were going to be with us earlier. Aki, alhamdulillah, just recognize Hassa. So these are a few of the others that weren't able to be with us this morning. And I also just want to note, as I looked out through the audience, I mentioned to you our Emerging County Leaders Program, the fact that we have interns. This year's intern who was with Brooke Learman, Brother Ibrahim, who's with Brooke Learman this summer. So you see, obviously, he's still concerned and involved, alhamdulillah, so we picked somebody good.
That's right. Well done.
So I want to, pick up kind of where you left off in some of the questions. Obviously, a key issue on the minds of Maryland and the global Muslim community is the continued assault on Gaza, and let me also mention now on Lebanon, where there are bombs dropping there, and the continually building humanitarian crisis in both places. And although it is not a state issue, this past Ramadan, you openly called for a ceasefire in Gaza and for a rush of humanitarian aid. Why did you choose to do that when so many other elected officials have not chosen to do so?
Because it's the right thing to do. My position has not changed. I believe deeply and strongly that we need to be able to bring the hostages home. I believe deeply and strongly that we need to get humanitarian aid into Gaza now. I believe deeply and strongly that we are allowing too much human suffering. And I think that the best way to do that is we must have a ceasefire. So I spoke out and I said that before because it's not just the right thing to do. My opinion on this has not changed. The type of heartbreak that we are continuing to see, and again, it's the heartbreak of the family who has now had someone held hostage for a year, and it's the heartbreak of someone who has watched the only community that they have known home forever destroyed, that we have to be able to deal with both of those heartbreaks. And I believe that the best way that we can, and you're absolutely right, it's not a state issue, but I did think it was a human responsibility for me to be able to call for something that I think is important.
We appreciate that. And also, let me just mention, not as a question, but people often talk about the hostage being returned. The UN has talked about, I may have the number wrong, 9,400 detainees from Palestine that are being held without charge over in Israel that also need to be released. Next question. Islamophobia and hate crimes. You know, there's been an uptick in that throughout the country, and including the state of Maryland. How will your administration address and combat rising Islamophobia and hate crimes that target the Muslim community in Maryland, and I would say they target anybody in the religious community in Maryland?
One of the things that I do every single week is I receive briefings, intelligence briefings from our law enforcement, from our intelligence agencies. And one of the consistent things that I'm now continuing to see is this, absolute spike that we are seeing in hate crimes and threats, and the spike that we have seen in anti-Black threats, the spike that we have seen in anti-Semitic threats, the spike that we have seen in anti-Muslim threats. It's staggering. It's staggering. And the reason that our administration has said that we are going to do anything and everything in our power to make sure that people are safe is because we mean that. And it's the reason that we have put millions of dollars into hardening homes of worship, as we've seen here, because no one ever should feel unsafe to worship God, ever. The reason that we have invested in things like being able to support educational journeys and educational experiences, the reason that we pass legislation that banning books, is because it's incredibly important that everybody in our society grows up learning about other people in our society. And when I hear people talking about how certain books should be banned because somehow it's going to make other people feel uncomfortable, or it's going to make other people, or learning about the history of this country somehow makes other people feel bad, the answer is that, and I say that loving your country does not mean lying about its history. Loving your country means understanding the full history of your country. The flaws too. The places where the country has gotten it wrong. The places where the country has not been as humane as it hoped. The places and the times when the country did not live up to its words or its aspirations. That people need to know that history too. And so the reason that we have passed legislation like that, the reason that we have passed laws, because I am a big believer in a quote by Dr. King where he says, laws don't change the heart, but laws do protect me from the heartless. That we must have laws in place that are letting people know that hate will find no home in the state of Maryland. And so, because I look at these trend lines, and because I see this every week, I know that there's more work that needs to be done. And that's why I've said that in our state, we are going to make sure that people can feel safe in their own neighborhoods, feel safe in their own communities, feel safe in their own homes of worship, and feel safe in their own skin. And that is a core priority for the way that we want to do our work.
Thank you, Governor. Prince George's County has been generous in accepting refugees from other countries, including places like Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. Some of them may be in danger of losing support services right now, including rent support and others. What resources are available from the state to help support them, and how can the Muslim community best work with your administration toward that end?
Thank you so much. And I love the fact that our state is such a welcoming state. I love the fact that we have, and people forget when we're having these conversations about immigration and asylum seekers, that what happens in these political years is sometimes this gets so politicized, and there's a demonization that then takes place. There's a demonization of people, and we're told to be afraid. without understanding that the truth of our community and our society is, immigrants represent about 20% of the labor workforce in the state of Maryland. That our immigrant population and people who are coming from other countries make up a strong number of our entrepreneurs and our public servants and our people who are making remarkable contributions to our society. And from a personal perspective, I am the son of an immigrant who's, and her son now serves as the 63rd governor. So our ability on both a local level, as we're seeing in Prince George's County, and as we're seeing in other jurisdictions throughout the state of Maryland, but also our ability for the state to be able to support those efforts becomes incredibly important. And that's why we're very proud of the work that we've been able to do. To be able to support local jurisdictions when it comes to everything from relocation supports to housing supports. We ended up passing the most aggressive and comprehensive housing package of any governor of recent history. And that includes things like rental supports. That includes things like for people who are renting in properties, giving them first right of refusal to become homeowners. That includes things like making it more difficult for people to focus on evictions and just pushing people out into the streets. These are all things that we did in partnership with our local jurisdictions. And I think some of the things we can do together is we want to make sure that we stay close with the community, stay close with community organizations, that we get a better understanding of what people are seeing and hearing. Because as we continue to have those strong networks and have those strong ties, we're then able to do what we can do from the state level to be able to advance communities and ease pain. And so we're proud of the work that we've been able to do thus far, but we also know that if you can have a strong immigrant community within a jurisdiction, you then have a strong community. And that is something that we believe in and something that we are going to invest in and fight for.
Thank you, Governor. I think one of the things we'd like to do is be able to work with your staff on where resources might be, that we connect them with those people in the community that need them. So
Absolutely.
We'll follow up with that. You talked about economic opportunity, which is so critically important. The Muslim community is very diverse and contains men and women of all skill levels, including professionals and many entrepreneurs from different backgrounds. You've spoken previously, just as you were mentioning, the minority contracting issue. For years, the minority contracting opportunities from the state has been very poor at meeting contracting goals, and partially due to a structure that was non-functional. It was like, we're going to do it, but we're only going to do it in a way that it doesn't actually work. So what policies has your administration been putting in place to improve economic mobility and access to business opportunities for Maryland's minority business community, and particularly those, obviously, our primary focus is Prince George's County, but throughout the state? You
are wonderfully kind in saying very poor, because that was a very kind way of putting it. Because what we have had in the state of Maryland is we have had goals that we've come nowhere near hitting. And I always say that when you have a goal, when you have a goal that you have no intention of hitting, it's not a goal. Right? The parallel I always use, Brother Jamil, is if I told my children, I have a 13-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son, and if I told them, hey, your bedtime is 10 o'clock, and then at 11 o'clock they're still up, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? We're like, oh, we thought it was just a suggestion. Like, no, it wasn't a suggestion. And I feel like the way that Maryland has treated its minority-owned businesses is we've had suggestions as to participation. And that suggestion has been at 27% participation, and the state came nowhere near hitting that benchmark. And so what we have done is we've said that we are going to do away with the idea of the free waivers that oftentimes took place, where people could, when bids came out, particularly for government dollars and government contracts, and people said, well, I made a good faith effort to have minority participation, and I just could not find anybody. And then oftentimes what would then happen is they would just give away the waiver and say, well, they made a good faith effort, and let's give them the contract. What we've done differently is when a person comes back and says we made a good faith effort, we will turn around and say, we'll try again. Because good faith effort is not good enough. You need to make sure you fulfill contracts. That's why when we talk about things like, a $2 billion in additional capital that's gone towards our minority-owned businesses, that did not happen by accident. That happened because contracts oftentimes that would have been given away without minority participation were pulled back until there was minority participation. That's intentionality. It's talking about things like, how can we increase capital? One of the first bills that we introduced, one of the first bills that we testified on behalf of, and one of the first bills that I signed was something called the Access to Banking Act. And that was exclusively about how are we increasing capital to our small businesses, and particularly our minority-owned businesses. Capital, access to liquidity, especially for our early startup businesses. The reason that becomes important is this, and I say this as a person who ran a small business before I ran for governor. The first round of capital that you get is generally your friends and family round. It's going to people you know and having them give you capital and give you supports so you can turn your idea into a business. Here's the problem. Not everybody has the same friends. And not everybody has the same family. And so what would happen is minority-owned businesses were generally left out because the friends and family round generally did not include minority-owned businesses. So the state said, we can actually do a better job of providing capital. We can do a better job of working with our banks and our credit unions to make sure that our minority-owned businesses were getting the capital that they needed. And this has meant having a historic infusion of cash going towards our entrepreneurs and our entrepreneurs of color, which is providing more opportunities for our Black-owned and our minority-owned businesses to be able to grow and succeed. And we've been able to work with our jurisdictions on how we're thinking about education in a different way. When we set our pathway, the pathway is to work, wages, and wealth. And we need all three. Work. It means things like making historic investments in apprenticeship programs and trade programs. Since our administration has come on board, we have not doubled, we have not tripled, we have quadrupled the amount of people in apprenticeship and trade programs that we have right now in the state of Maryland. And we now have amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country. That the state of Maryland has now created the first ever service year platform for our high school graduates anywhere in the country, where our high school graduates now have an opportunity to have a year of service to the state of Maryland, a paid year of service to the state of Maryland. That we've been able to raise wages. In our first months of office, we were able to introduce legislation that actually sped up getting us to a $15 minimum wage, because gone to be the days when you have someone who's working jobs, in some cases multiple jobs, and still living at or below a poverty line, and being able to make sure that we're stop disincentivizing work and get people back into the workforce. And we've been able to focus on wealth, the ability to actually own something and to own more than you owe. And that's where the entrepreneurship focus, that's where the housing focus, that's where those things come on board. And so I am deeply convinced that if we can keep our trajectory, Maryland will be the state that can not only end a racial wealth gap, but by ending a racial wealth gap, Maryland can be the state that can have a faster moving economy than anywhere else in the country, because you have an economy where more people are actually participating in that economy as well.
Thank you very much. And I know that you have stopped, so I'm going to go to this one last question, and how long it takes is kind of up to you at this point. So what we're seeing, this is something that we're seeing all over the country, which is an uptick in crimes being committed, particularly by young people. And we saw our state's attorney was here with us for a little bit, who's been dealing with this, Aisha Brave Boy, particularly by youth, juveniles in particular. How is the administration working, I guess, also with the local jurisdictions to try to address this?
Yeah, this is.
And I guess not from just a criminal point of view, but how do we get them for feeling they need criminality is the best option?
Amen. And I'm glad you brought up that point as well, because I think we have to address both. We have to both increase accountability and increase opportunity. And I think anyone who's talking about one without talking about the other is not being serious about this. You have to increase accountability and increase opportunity. And I know this was a very personal thing for me because one of the big motivations that I had when I ran for governor was I was tired. I was tired of being in communities that felt like we were under siege. I was tired of watching crime rates continue to tick up, tired of the fact that before I became the governor, that we saw how the homicide rate in the state of Maryland nearly doubled over an 8-year period. Nearly doubled. That before I became governor, the non-fatal shooting rate did double. And I promised I would never be a governor that just spent my time giving thoughts and prayers and attending funerals and doing nothing about the violence that we were seeing in our neighborhoods and our communities. And so when we came on board, we said we are going to both increase accountability and increase opportunity. And that meant working with our local jurisdictions, where we've made now the largest investments in local law enforcement that we have seen in our state's history, making sure that we have more law enforcement officers who are trained, and I believe deeply that you can have a law enforcement team that moves with appropriate intensity and absolute integrity and full accountability. That we made sure that we were actually supporting people as they were coming back home, and reducing the recidivism rate, the rate of people who were leaving incarceration and going right back into incarceration because there was no opportunities waiting for them. That we're able to invest in community groups and violence prevention groups inside of our neighborhoods, inside of our communities. And so while we're very proud of the results that we have seen thus far, right now, when you're looking at the homicide rates in the state of Maryland, Maryland has had amongst the fastest drops in homicides over the past 18 months of anywhere in the entire country. If you look at every single indicator, and again, I look at this every week. If you look at every indicator, homicides, down. Non-fatal shootings, down. Juvenile homicides, down. Juvenile non-fatal shootings, down. Carjackings, down. Auto theft, down. Every single one of those indicators are down. And Maryland, on some of those indicators, have some of the fastest drops in the country. Now, we're not done. I'm not going to be done until everybody feels safe every day. I'm not going to be done. I'm not going to be done until people can grow up in communities that they feel safe walking around any time of the day. So we're going to keep on working with local jurisdictions. We're going to keep on working with local law enforcement. We're going to keep on working with community groups and faith leaders. We're going to keep on working with the private sector. We're going to keep on working with our state's attorneys. We're going to keep on working with everybody. And the thing I believe deeply, deeply, is that if we can continue working together, and while we've made significant progress across the board on every single one of those indicators, if we can work together, we are going to create a space where people aren't just safer, but people feel safer. Because I do understand that is what people are looking for. And I know that because that's exactly what I was looking for when I decided to run for governor. And I'm never going to forget that feeling, ever, as long as I'm in this office.
Governor, thank you very much for giving us your time, for visiting us here, to show us your concern, the work that you're doing. And I particularly want to remind the community the way that we help is working together as an ummah. And that means being politically and civically involved. If you are not registered to vote, there are people outside that will help you to register to vote right now. All you have to do is take 2 minutes to fill it out. And then we hope to see you on October 19th to support the organization. Jazakallah khairun. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Governor, thank you.